Hey, everybody. Welcome to Locked On Lakers on YouTube. Brian Kamenetzky and Abe Kamenetzky here with Alex Regla. Covers the Lakers for Newsbreak. At Newsbreak app, you can find his work there. And he also podcasts for Silver Screen and Roll on Tuesdays with our friends Harrison and Anthony. Alex, thanks so much for coming on. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me on.
I enjoy, by the way, the variations of facial hair that we've got going from me to Alex to Brian.
It's like a before and after. It's like
mustache.
The progress.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
I got to be careful. If I let it grow out too long, I look like Gallagher. So it's not good, and I don't grow a particularly good beard. So this is where we are. Where the Lakers are, of course, Alex, is out in the first round in 6 games and looking vulnerable, I think, going forward. The question we want to ask here on today's segment, what weaknesses do you think they most need to address this offseason? Because we talked about this a little bit on the podcast for Friday. It's not like they're a bad team, and it's hard to tell exactly what went horribly wrong because the guys were injured. And when LeBron isn't at full strength and when AD isn't there, you don't really see how the parts work. So what do you prioritize this offseason, Alex?
Yeah, like you hit it. It's tough to like break it down and say, okay, this went wrong, this went right. That's going to be the biggest issue with the front office in terms of how they approach this offseason, because the injuries played a huge factor in trying to identify what they need to fix. But I think the things that are obviously overcome any injuries are just the 3-point shooting. I think regardless of who's healthy, who's not healthy, that needs to be a big top priority. And Rob Pelinka said, obviously, they can always need more shooting. That's always a thing they want to address. I kind of hope they target different types of shooters, like shooters that can catch off off the dribble shooters, guys who could do a little more than just spot up. Like a guy like Wes Matthews, awesome spot up shooter, but when he's not doing that, there's nothing really else to his game. So guys who have a little extra in their bag, who could just catch, shoot, attack, close out. Outside of that, like any type of shot creation at all would be super helpful, especially if LeBron's not 100% to start the year, or if he misses any more time. I think those 2 things, number one and 2, those are the big things.
You know, Andy, it's funny because like shot creation is a weird one, because on the one hand you need it, and that's part of the reason Dennis Schroeder's there. And I think that question becomes a little bit of a referendum on what you spend to bring him back and all that. But it's also one of those things that you don't want to totally over prioritize, because LeBron is going to be on the floor so much, particularly in the playoffs, that you can it's got to be a guy who can create shots but also move off the ball, also finish on the catch, all things that Dennis Schroeder was supposed to be able to do.
But like a Drew Holiday type who is better at that stuff than Dennis Schroeder is, who also, by the way, can be gotten for the mid-level. Like basically we need an all NBA caliber player, but one that in his prime preferably, but that can be gotten for the mid-level or half of the mid-level. So
right. But Alex, let me ask you, because like at his exit interview, and you've heard this, Schroeder talked a lot about comfort, and he talked a lot about coming back next year and all this other stuff and being more comfortable in his role. This was a get to know you kind of year. Would you expect him to be better at all of that stuff next year than he was this year?
Like Dennis Schroeder is polarizing, right? So, but yeah, like I think he would be better.
He's very weird, Alex.
He's very weird. I wrote a little thing about him before he joined the Lakers, and he has a crazy backstory that I think fans really should go look into. Like born in Germany, was a skateboarder like for his whole life, would skateboard to practice. He would just skateboard all the time.
And I love skaters. I grew up skating. Skaters.
Yeah, he's eccentric for sure. But you know what? People forget. I know he struggled in the playoffs, but everyone did.
But even that, it was like there was no middle ground, because when he was good in the playoffs, he was excellent. The 2 games they won, he was very productive.
There was a couple games there awful. He was really good.
Right, he was just awful. And it's like, be just regular bad or be ordinary. Don't be terrible when the Lakers need you to be good. And I think that's why people look at his playoffs and say, "Oh my God, he was awful." Well, he actually wasn't. He was just awful when they really needed him to be good.
Yeah, consistency is the biggest thing with Schroeder. And he did mention, like, I like that he mentioned this, was that he wants to be a better catch and shoot threat out there with LeBron and AD. And that's obviously a big thing, that he can help himself stay on the floor. He can help the spacing if he could be like just replicate his OKC numbers. he was a really good shooter with Under, and then he was an okay shooter with the Lakers. But defenses don't respect him out there, right? They're going to let him shoot. He has that kind of weird wind up pump fake thing he likes to do, and it's slow. Defenses can rotate quickly to that, but I expect him to be better, just strictly from playing with LeBron and AD more. He's not the number one guy; he'd be the number 3 guy. But yeah, consistency just has to be key with him.
Yeah, at least he doesn't shoot sideways like Campaign. I hate that.
Campaign makes him though.
I was going to say, man, I wish he was shooting like Campaign.
Right, but I don't like that sideways thing that Payne does. I never paid attention to it before because who did? It just annoys me.
Because he's left-handed. Like left-handed shooters.
I don't care.
Often, they often square up weird. Like Fisher used to do that all the time. He would. It's something about left-handed shooters.
Derek Fisher is a Laker, though.
Before
we'll wrap on this, it's interesting though. Schroeder becomes fascinating for so many different reasons because he's also one of the only guys you could look at as, if they brought it back relatively intact, as somebody where internal improvement is possible. Like you look at it, it's like everybody else is kind of what they are. I think Kuz is basically what he is at this point. Caruso is what he is. All useful players, but you look at OKC Schroeder versus Lakers Schroeder, and there is definitely a gap there. And if Schroeder becomes OKC Schroeder, like you say, Alex, that's a totally different player. It's like making a trade.
Yeah, he becomes more dynamic, and the team becomes more dynamic. And I thought one of the things we didn't see enough this year, or it didn't feel like it, was his speed. Like against Phoenix, that was the biggest thing. I thought Phoenix was just so much more athletic. They just looked so much more explosive than the Lakers. And obviously the injuries played a big part of that. But there were so many times where the Lakers would miss the shot, and Phoenix was already pushing it down into early offense. They killed the Lakers in early offense this series. They struggled in the half court against the Lakers, but that's the biggest thing. I thought Dennis was going to add just a jolt of kind of speed and athleticism, and maybe he did, and we just didn't see it enough because the injuries were there. But I think that aspect, just him kind of pushing the pace and just adding some type of like youth, even if it's not by age, but just like the way they play.
Two quick things. Yeah, 2 quick things before we go. First of all, hopefully one of the elements of internal improvement, Brian had mentioned Schroeder as a candidate, assuming he's
THT. I'm sorry, I forgot THT. I forgot.
I was talking about this on a recent podcast. The ideal for the Lakers would be THT taking the 3rd year leap unexpectedly that Andrew Bynum took going into his 3rd year that nobody saw coming, including obviously Kobe, who wanted his ass shipped out to New Jersey for Jason Kidd. But with Schroeder too, I'm going to be on this. I'm going to be on this horse for a while because I think it's true. I think one of the issues with Schroeder is he is better off coming off the bench. I think that's ultimately the player that he best is, even though he is a legitimate, capable starter. I don't think that's actually who he is at his core, at his greatest strengths, including in a career year with OKC. And that maybe could be one of the push-pulls they need to figure out with Schroeder, or maybe it gets settled by, hey, here's the contract you're getting. It's very generous. You're welcome. But part of it is a willingness, if need be, to come off the bench.
And the Lakers kind of shot themselves in the foot with that when they were initially just like, hey, we're happy you're here. We want to extend you. And also you're going to be the starter. Like, don't worry about it. We know you want to start. That's going to happen. Almost guaranteeing him that spot in a way. So yeah, maybe they learned their lesson. And I think, I'm not sure if it was Jared Dudley or Markieff Morris. I think he kind of alluded to some of the role players not really kind of buying into their role player side of things. And I think that's an aspect that this team kind of had. I thought some guys could have did a better job adjusting or not kind of demanding things. Obviously, we don't know who demanded what. But yeah, I think maybe Dennis coming off the bench does add some extra offense. And going back to the THT point, we talked about shot creation and free agency. THT is one of the few guys who can get his own shot. And we saw it like in, I think it was game 5 or game 6, he came in for a few minutes and he was the only guy who can do something with LeBron not there. And that's your 2nd-year player. So hopefully he takes a jump, and he's talked about improving his jumper. That'd be a huge thing for him. So yeah, I'm excited to see THT, and hopefully, I don't know if we see him in Summer League.
And then the reliability on defense. I mean, it's really that's what gets him pulled off the floor in important moments. All right, Alex Regla, you can follow his work at Newsbreak at Newsbreak app, podcast for Silver Screen and Roll on Tuesdays with Anthony and with Harrison. Be sure to check out the full podcast we have with Alex. That went is for Friday, and just full of great stuff just like this. Alex, thanks again. We appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.